if you were to ask anybody, car person or otherwise, what is the greatest supercar on earth, I would wager pretty good money that most of them would say Ferrari. However, it seems that every now and again somebody comes along who thinks they can do it just a little bit better, and more often than not they wind up changing the face of the market forever. In the late 80s, early 90s, you had the Honda NSX. It came along and showed that you could have a car which looked as exotic as a Ferrari, handled just as well as a Ferrari, and did not fall apart like a 1980s Ferrari might. In the early 2000s, the Lamborghini Gallardo stormed onto the stage and proved that the Raging Bull was no longer a brand simply for posers and bedroom wall posters. It beat the Ferrari 360 in the power stakes by a considerable margin and forced them to introduce the amazing F430. But Ferrari didn't have very much time to relax. Just as soon as they'd beaten back their Italian neighbours, a new threat emerged. It came from Woking, a small town in Surrey, and it bore an equally famous name, McLaren. Initially debuted in 2009 and then unleashed to the public in 2011, the slightly technically named MP412C promised to be better than a Ferrari 458 in every measurable way. Now, at the time, most people said yes, in every measurable way, the 12C was a better car. However, supercars are about an awful lot more than that which you can stick a microscope up against. They're about feeling, they're about passion, they're about excitement. And that seemed to be the area where McLaren just, well, hadn't focused enough time and attention. There's quite a few things that happened to the 12C as it later became known. It had an awful lot of quirks, and not just the good Doug DeMuro kind. It had an entry system which often locked owners out of their own cars in the rain, and an entertainment system that simply wasn't very entertaining. However, with prices of these once £250,000 supercars now at, well, nicely spec'd Boxster money, is it time to reconsider them? That, I think, is a superb question, because one day I would like to become a full-on supercar owner, and it's very possible that the 12C could be the car for me. However, until today, I've not actually driven one. And so I want to say a big thank you to a channel fan and good friend of mine who's allowed me to drive his stunning example. So here we are, the car that started the modern era for McLaren, presented in absolutely stunning volcano red. Now the sun has crept off behind a cloud for a little bit, but even so you can still appreciate how absolutely gobsmackingly beautiful this colour is. Now the 12C is a car whose looks have grown on me very much. The front end is still a little soft, but when they came out I wasn't a fan. Nearly a decade later, I think it's actually one of the most coherent looking designs McLaren have ever done. It's a really, really nice thing. Here in spider form, it still works very well. They've integrated the roof very, very neatly. It means you get these flying buttresses at the back. A little bit of a view of the engine, not that you can get really that close to it. You've got the sort of signature twin exit exhaust at the back, which looked like they were going to be a McLaren thing. Then they went away, then they kind of came back, and I don't know. Maybe the Super Series is going to keep that as its signature because the Sport Series doesn't have it. They have it down here. 720's got it up here. I don't know. But it's a cool thing. If you are looking at buying one of these, probably wise to check out the buying guide that I did with Thorny Motorsport. One of the most common issues with these is these little lights at the back do like to fog up. This car looks like he's got a pretty reasonable spec. You've got bits of carbon fibre, bits of dark palladium. You've got a big old carbon fibre blade on the side. The paintwork itself would have been a pretty expensive option. You can see there as the sun comes out. On camera it looks quite orangey. There is a bit of orange in there. It's not the same as Volcano Orange, but it is a marvellous looking thing. Details like this wing mirror here look utterly and totally fantastic. Something else to note, this being a 12C actually has steel brakes on it. Pretty difficult to buy a McLaren these days with steels on. I think you can't even have them as an option anymore. Most now come with ceramic as standard. The car is wearing these lovely super lightweight wheels, and this being a later car, early cars had this system where you had to kind of try and swipe to get in, and it didn't work very well. This car's got a button very much the same as later models. Now this does not have soft closed doors, So to shut it, it needs a very, very firm hand. But here's one thing about early McLaren's 12C 650s that people don't realise. Everyone complains about the sill as being the problem sort of for getting in the car. The sill is not the issue. Later cars, the 570, 720, they scalloped it out a little bit. They kind of cut it down here. It's actually the position of the door, because you're trying to get in here and the door is kind of right in your face, especially if it's a little sort of tight parking space and you haven't got enough room to manoeuvre. But entry into a McLaren, very much like any sort of Lotus, get your left leg in as far as you can and then fall down. You can see down here the plate bearing the model inscription of MP4-12C, which is still on there, even though by the time this car was made, I believe they were referring to it simply as 12C, which I think they did just from the 2012 onwards. Inside, I've forgotten how much I really like this interior. There, that door slam, unfortunately, very necessary. You've got your aircon controls over here. You've got the notorious iris in the middle. And look at this flowing line that runs the whole way through the car. It's beautiful, absolutely lovely. Leather steering wheel, same as all McLarens that followed it. Nice, simple, no buttons on here. You've got the paddle. This is actually quite a bit smaller than some of the McLarens I've used later. Extended paddles would be nice. Again, a McLaren trait. You can push it forward or backwards on either side. Big analog dial in the middle. Analog dials in a McLaren seems like a world ago, doesn't it? I like it. I really, really like it. Very basic, very simple. Electric displays on the side. So far removed from the 720. Standard down here. Aero, manual. So this is, you have to press this button to get the whole thing working. Same as with any McLaren, really. Winter mode, launch control, not going to be using those. Any standard stuff. The view out is amazing, because you can see these haunches very, very clearly. Really, really nice. Lovely place to be. Alcantara cover up here. Alcantara wrapping this. I've been in a lot of McLarens this week. A lot of McLarens. And this one still feels nice. One little difference you can see here. Meridian DSP sound system, which probably would have been an upgrade. Meridian they do not use anymore. I think their last one to use it was the 650, but they changed afterwards. However, if you're worried that a 12C is going to feel like an old, kind of worse place to be compared to say like a 570 or something, don't. It's different, but it's still very, very much McLaren, and it does not feel that old. It feels great. So let's carry on the drive. The one thing I can tell you before I've even put my foot down in anger is that this is a sensationally comfortable car. I currently have it in fully auto everything, which I will get out of in a moment, don't you worry, and it is absolutely wonderful. It's plenty calm, but the noise it's making is quite pleasing. It's a very special feeling place to be. It's an easy car to drive, and it just feels so right. Being a serial Lotus owner, I can quite easily see the familial link between this car and those from Hethel that I do so adore. In fact, I'm told that of the 9 engineers that designed and developed this car, 7 of them were ex-Lotus. In many ways, you can almost see this as the esprit that we never got. Now, this particular car is a very late example of the 12C. As mentioned, the model was introduced in 2011, but by 2014 it was already replaced by the 650S, which was in many ways a sort of facelift and evolution of this car. And from the rear, you pretty much can't tell them apart. The 650 is quite different from the front because it basically looks like a 12C with a P1 nose grafted on. In fact, you could say that this late 12C has more in common with a 650 than it does with an early 12C. Build quality is notably better in this car, and it feels very, very solid indeed. Things generally work. Nothing's broken in the time that this car's owner has had it, and although it's only got 9,000 miles on the odometer, believe me, that's actually a fair few for a lot of McLarens and indeed supercars in general of this age. However, the measure of any supercar is whether it can put a smile on your face down an enjoyable country road. And that is exactly what I have here. So, I'm going to turn the car into active mode. I'm going to put the aero on because why wouldn't you? You'll see that engaging already at the back. and I'm going to leave the powertrain in sport and the suspension in comfort. Well, it certainly doesn't lack for pace. You only need to tickle the throttle a little bit and she really, really shifts. Turns in very, very nice. Not, I would say, as pin sharp as the 720 or as textured as the 570. But she still moves. That turbocharged engine provides a real hearty punch, especially in the mid-range. Although it isn't the most sonorous unit, I mean, they did improve it a little bit in the 650, but it was marginal. No McLaren has ever sounded truly spectacular, at least not since the F1 anyway. One thing this car is doing spectacularly is just floating down this road. Downshift is brilliant and incredibly fast. This car has the first generation of the precog system, and it seems that even if you sort of load up that next gear, the shifts up, sometimes they're quick, sometimes they're not. It's a bit of a mixed bag. One thing the guys at Thorny told me is if you put some sportier cats on this car and a freer flowing exhaust, believe it or not, it does make the gearbox faster. Now, this car does have a connection with Thorny too, because its owner bought it having watched my own video on 12Cs, 650s and things you have to watch out for McLaren's in general, and he didn't want to buy a car without a warranty. However, you may have noticed that McLaren dealers in general don't seem very keen on stocking their older cars. If you go to any Ferrari dealership, any Porsche dealership, you will see loads and loads of cars in there. Maybe they're not even for sale, but the last time I went to a Porsche dealership, they had an old 911 SC from the mid-80s, just because it's a cool old 911. They want to celebrate their heritage. And that's something I think the McLaren really, really need to do more of. I mean, crikey, they haven't even got a lot of heritage yet, so there's nothing wrong in celebrating the little that they do have. Unfortunately, one of the big problems with these cars is the fact that if you want to put an aftermarket warranty on one, they can be very, very expensive indeed. In fact, I believe McLaren will charge you something along the lines of about £5,000 a year for an extended warranty. And if you were considering buying one of these at the cheaper end of the market, you know, £70,000, £75,000, something like that, £5,000 a year, I suspect, is probably a hell of a lot of money to you. Thorny will inspect your car and put a warranty on it for a much, much more reasonable £2,800. And if that's something that interests you, please do go and speak to the people there about it, because I think if I was going to have one of these cars, I'm generally not a sort of warranty person, but I think it's very much worth the risk, or more accurately, it's worth paying the price for the peace of mind. The McLaren, in actually many ways, I suppose, is almost a sort of echo of the NSX from years past, in that it's an incredibly usable car. Even in this Spider form, you've got a load area in the back for when the roof is up, of course, and you've got a very, very generous boot at the front that's currently storing all of my camera kit quite happily. This week I've been driving the Jaguar F-Type Svr that you've probably seen on the channel a couple of weeks ago, and this, I think, is probably an easier car to take away. If you are buying this as a used purchase, you're probably also interested in the sort of more mundane things like fuel economy. And I'm also pleased to report that this car is actually pretty damn economical. If you want to, you can get more than 30 to the gallon out of it. And for something with 625 horsepower, as these later 12Cs got, that's incredible. That's really, seriously impressive. What I'm going to do for this is I'm just going to move this dial around one notch and I'm going to put the chassis into sport to see how that changes things. Now, the powertrain in this car, I'm leaving in sport mode. I'm not going to go anywhere near track. The reason for that being that in these earlier cars, in powertrain mode, the response and the aggressiveness of the engine was also linked with the traction control. So if you wanted full track mode, the traction control was in its least aggressive mode. Some people criticise these cars for not being playful enough and not fun enough, but you know what? I don't really believe that Chris Harris slide around every bend on a track type stuff is of any practical use for a car, and certainly not for a car review. I mean, you can't do it on the public roads, and you definitely can't do it on a track day. And as much as I love and respect Chris, well, I'm not as good a driver as him. I'll happily say that. And so for me, I want to just see how a reasonably competent driver fares with this car on a chilly but nice day down a decent road. You do not need to rev this car out to get the best out of it. Making good progress is very, very easy indeed. You know, the steering around the dead ahead just doesn't have the accuracy of the 720 or that crazy feel of the 570s, but it's by no means bad, and the chassis talks to you very, very well indeed. These seats are much more supportive than they may appear. And even in sport mode, actually, the car is extremely well damped. That's probably the trade-off that's being made here, that this is a softer ride than the 720, definitely. But I don't consider it to be like a chasm. I was worried that this car might just feel like wallowy in comparison, but it really, really doesn't. The view out the front of this thing is utterly fabulous. One of the issues I've been having with the F-Type this week is that you've got this big high bonnet. I know you can see some of it, you just cannot place the car on the road. That corner of the car is just completely gone from your view, and it makes getting a car down a road like this a little tricky. This thing though, you know exactly where the car is. I remember the very first time I ever drove a McLaren. I drove a 650 on a winter's day at Ascot. I'd been asked by a friend of mine to go and test drive a car on their behalf, and because I'm such a good friend, I went and drove that car. And I was concerned by the sheer size of it. These are not small cars. You look at them and they look pretty daunting, pretty big. I mean, the grand scheme of things, they aren't actually massive, but the stance they've got makes them look pretty damn chunky. And I drove this car, and I was out in it for something like 10-15 minutes. And when we got back, the guy asked me to park it at the back of the car park. And I'm sure you know what all car dealers are like. Their car park is full of far, far too many cars. And I had to slot this £220,000 650 between a then brand spanking new 570S, and I think there was a P1 the other side. And I was happy to do it. It was not a problem in the least. Absolutely fine. She really rips. Now you can build up speed in a way that's demands attention. Really, really does. One of the issues I got with the 570, which has a very close relative of this engine, it's nearly the same thing, is that just at that top reach of the rev range, it just goes a little flat. This doesn't. This has fireworks. Now my friends at Thorney recently put a 12C and a 650 on the dyno, and they're basically the same power. This thing is not short of go at all. It's got more than enough. My only criticism really is that sound. There's enough of it, it's just not particularly exciting. However, does this feel like a supercar? Absolutely. And of course, the biggest part of a supercar experience actually is the way people respond to it. And people love McLaren's. I mean, seriously, people go nuts for them. And I can see why. This is a stunning, brilliant, wonderful looking car. Is it the bestest thing in the world to drive? No, it's not. Is it the best McLaren to drive? No, it's not. Is it a stupid amount of car for the money that's being asked for them? Yes. Would I take a chance on a 12C? Yes, I would. Yes, I really, really would. Is a 650 better? Yeah, maybe. They look different. I mean, a late 12C is probably just as good as an early 650. McLaren's, again, much like my favourite brand Lotus, they're all different. Every single car is different. You cannot just say, oh, these ones any good. Each individual car will have its own particular traits, quirks, idiosyncrasies, and so for that reason, if you are going to buy one of these, spend a little bit of money, get it inspected, get it looked at, buy wisely like my friend has here, and you will have a car that is ridiculously good fun, very enjoyable, and just perfect for these British roads. There you go, everybody. That is the end of McLaren Week. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you've enjoyed this celebration of British cars here on the channel. Once again, thank you all so much for getting me over that 50,000 subscriber threshold. It has been a spectacular few years, and I look forward to many, many more. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment below, subscribe if you haven't already. We'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.